There are some who say that there are 6 degrees of separation between all people. But we know in the Jewish community that there's usually only 1 degree of separation, if that. Not so many of us in the world. Wherever I go in the world, I'm likely to bump into a Jewish person I know, much to the chagrin of my children when I travel with them. According to Jewish tradition, we're even closer than 1 degree. When someone in the Jewish community says, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" the answer is always, yes, from Sinai. We were all at Sinai, all Jewish souls who were living and yet to be born, and still yet to be born, we're all standing at Sinai according to Jewish tradition. And that's where we are in this week's Torah portion. In the book of Exodus, we are reading chapter 19, when we approach Sinai, and chapter 20, in which we receive the 10 Commandments. And as we prepared to receive the 10 Commandments, it said that we camped as one, vayichan. The word for to encamp is in the singular, that in a moment, can you imagine the Jewish community was somehow one? Don't get too excited about that, because even though we might have been one at that moment in terms of being prepared to receive Torah, how we received Torah, how we understood Torah was in many, many different ways. Yes, even at that moment, there was diversity in our unity. We are told that all the people who had gathered at Sinai, they witnessed the thundering. Yes, there was a moment of synesthesia in which we saw the thunder. But why does it say that the thunderings are in the plural? Rabbi Yochanan, a Talmudic sage, says that when God spoke, the divine voice divided into 70 tongues, and each of those into 70 languages, so that everyone could understand revelation according to their ability, from old and wise to the infant who had not yet been weaned. Each person was given a unique fragment of revelation, an experience of Sinai that only they could perceive. Every person in every generation. The moment of Sinai was as one for our people, but the understanding of revelation, what we heard, was different. Depending on our experiences, the time in which we are born, many other things about our personality, what we're going to hear from Sinai will be different one from the other. And we know from generation to generation, even the Torah that our ancestors received and as they lived it in a certain way has changed over the years. Yesterday I was reminding the class at North Park Seminary, hello class at North Park Seminary, glad you could make it, Professor Paul Louise class, that the way we practice Judaism is not the way we practiced Judaism back in the time of the Torah, back in the time when the temple stood in Jerusalem. I said, you're not going to come tomorrow night and see animal sacrifices at my congregation. Fortunately, we don't do that anymore. But that's what Torah told us to do. Torah told us that we worship God through animal sacrifice. But that was a particular way of hearing God's voice at a particular time. And after the temples were destroyed, the rabbis thought that this was no longer the way that we were going to observe, no longer the way we would pray to God. That instead of actually sacrificing animals, we would mention it, we would read it, we would study it, but we wouldn't actually sacrifice animals until there was a 3rd temple that was built. But even in more recent times, we think about our own Reform movement ancestors in the 19th century who, in Germany, with the onset of the Emancipation and the Enlightenment, said some of the ways that we practiced Judaism in the past, they were part of that earlier world. But now, in the modern era, there's certain things that we want to do a little differently, or perhaps not even do at all. The strict laws of kashrut, they're keeping us from socializing and mingling with our non-Jewish neighbors. Maybe there are different ways in which we can observe our tradition. And that has always been the case, Dor L'Dor, from generation to generation. Every generation inherits a tradition, and every generation needs to make it their own. In this wonderful new book by Joshua Leifer, and Mark Blumenthal just told me he's reading it, and I think some others are reading it because I have copied the first and last chapter, the introduction, and the conclusion for our One Congregation, Many Voices program. Joshua Leifer, who is just 30 years old, who wrote this book. And he talks about the evolution of the American Jewish community over the last 100 years, from 1924 to 2024. He thought that was a good period to look at because 1924 was the year that the Immigrant Exclusion Act was passed, limiting immigration to this country, not just for Jews, but for others as well. And for much of the Jewish community in this country, we came here when the borders were open between the 1880s and 1924. And coming to the shores of the United States changed how we practice our Judaism. And what Leifer talks about in this book is that there were three paradigms that the majority Jewish community had as our consensus about what was important in Jewish practice over the last 100 years. 1, Americanism, 2, Zionism, and 3, liberalism. And how does he define those things? Americanism. The Jews in this country have been provided with a level of material and physical security they had never known before. And what came with that, unfortunately, though, was a loss of older expressions of Jewish life, traditionalist orthodoxy and left-wing Yiddish radicalism. Number 2, Zionism. American Jews imagine Israel as a moral beacon and Zionism as a secular fulfillment of the religious faith that they no longer believed in. Zionism was a unifying framework for American Jewish organizations, but now many are struggling with that because it has also buoyed chauvinist and selfish forms of Jewish expression. And number 3, liberalism. American Judaism's most fundamental axiom was not sacred obligation, but personal choice, which Leifer also critiques as having moved us away from our tradition and not filled it in with something that is meaningful. The premise of his book is that these 3 pillars have ceased to be viable ways for us to express our Judaism now in this time. Number 1, because of the emergence of anti-Semitism, it's threatening the belief in Americanism, that this is the golden Medina, that this is the golden country where everything will be okay for us. And 2, Zionism is also cracking. He argues that the mythologized vision of a progressive, social democratic Israel was a source of inspiration for older generations, but an increasing number of young American Jews have only known Israel as an authoritarian state. And finally, the imagined perfect compatibility of Judaism and American liberal capitalist culture is also unraveling. And so what to do at this time, when Americanism, Zionism, and liberalism, which had been cornerstones of our Judaism, are now shifting? Communal leaders are concerned about rising rates of disaffiliation from the Jewish community. I quote Leifer, "What these establishment Jewish leaders fail to realize is that their institutions are declining not because Judaism has been insufficiently liberalized, commodified, or sanitized, but because individual fulfillment, gratification of the sovereign self has replaced communal and familial obligations as the basis for the good life." And this is what he sees as causing the deterioration of the Jewish community in our time. Moreover, he argues, the decline in participation in religious life is not a unique Jewish phenomenon, not a unique phenomenon to Reform or conservative or even Orthodox Judaism, but it is a feature of post-industrial Western democracies. And my students from the seminary can say that churches are finding the same issues as well. We could see all these things as bad news for the Jews, but Joshua Leifer sees this as an opportunity. What will Judaism be in the future? How do we not just lean back on what we have already known, but to create something new, to create something vibrant that is also deeply rooted in our tradition. While Moses is up on Mount Sinai, as we read today in our Torah, we know that what is happening down below is that the Israelites are growing restless. We don't read it until a few weeks from now, but you can almost imagine at this moment in Torah, there's a split screen. See Moses at the top of the mountain, which we read about today, and down below, the Israelites don't know what has happened to their leader. And so they turn to his brother Aaron, and they beg him to build a golden calf. This God that we can't see or know with our physical senses, we want something that we can rely on. We want something that's familiar. And so they ask Aaron to build the golden calf. And when Moses comes down the mountain and sees that they are dancing and celebrating around this idol, we know what Moses does. He takes those tablets and he breaks them. He shatters them. It's a tragic moment for the Israelites. We see Moses' tremendous anger, God's words that had been engraved on the stones strewn. These tablets that were holy are now gone. Yet, this moment turns into a great achievement for Moses. How, you might ask? The Torah, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, concludes with these words: Moses has died. And in the last few verses of the Torah we read, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Eternal singled out face to face for the various signs and portents that the Eternal sent him to display." Signs and portents. What were the signs and portents? Rashi, the great medieval commentator, asks that question. One might think that the signs and portents would be the splitting of the sea or the plagues. But Rashi gives a different answer. He says no, that the signs and portents that God is referring to here are when Moses took the tablets and threw them to the ground and shattered them. And God turned to Moses and said, "Yesher koach, good job, all the strength to you for breaking those tablets." God was pleased that Moses had broken the tablets. And that was his great achievement. That's what Rashi teaches. Why would this be Moses' great achievement? Because Moses could see at the moment that if he brought these tablets to the people, that they would turn them into an idol as they had the golden calf. And so he shatters the tablets. Leifer's book, Tablets Shattered, is named for this commentary. The old paradigms of American Jewish life have been shattered, but this is not all bad news. Just like the shattering the tablets was not all bad for the Jewish people. Those paradigms that we've had over the last 100 years might have served us well in the past, but to cling to them eternally is just a form of idolatry. We now have an opportunity to envision the next phase of American Jewish life. Leifer's critique is that American Judaism has become too solipsistic, self-centered and selfish, and too jingoistic, nationalist-focused. What does it look like to be a community that lives out its commitment to show our love for God, as it says in the Ve'ahavta, B'shivtecha v'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech, how we behave within our homes and out in the world, B'shochbecha v'kumecha, when we rise in the morning and throughout our day? This is Judaism's eternal invitation and challenge. Now, you might think that I'm going to answer today how we are going to live out our Judaism in the future, but I'm not, because on March 1st, One Congregation, Many Voices program, we're going to discuss this issue and have a panel of people from various generations helping us to think through this issue. So I'm not going to give an answer. I'm going to invite you to come and participate in that conversation, because it's only together, only if we talk amongst ourselves and between and among generations, that we'll be able to figure out how do we create a vibrant Jewish life that's deeply rooted in the Torah, in the commandments in the past, but is continuing to look forward into the future. According to Jewish tradition, the reverberation of Sinai continues to our day, which is what it means that all of us stood together at Sinai. But each of us hears the voice of Sinai differently, depending on many factors: our life experiences, education, connection to Jewish tradition, historical circumstances, and desire to listen deeply and ascertain what it means to live a God-infused life. Beth Emet has been a vibrant Jewish home for 75 years because of the commitment of previous generations to wrestle with how godliness can be made manifest in our lives and in the world. We have a bright future if we are willing not simply to rely on what has served us well in our past, but to face the challenges in our world and our religious life with thoughtfulness and conviction, that our engagement with Jewish tradition and teachings can guide us in our current circumstances to live lives of meaning and purpose. In this way, this powerful and holy moment of the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, this moment that we read in the Torah this week, will continue to reverberate in our community and in our lives and help us thrive now and in the future. Come and join us on March 1st as we explore how we'll do this together. We celebrate this Shabbat all the people in our community who have put Beth Emet in their wills. These people have committed to give a bequest many hundreds of years in the future after they die. We are so appreciative that we are looking forward into that future time to be generous to our community. We know that our community cannot survive on just our annual financial commitment through our dues or through even other kinds of giving, but that we need to have bequests in order to help sustain our community and help it thrive into the future. We are just like universities and theaters and museums and other places that we rely on generosity for our sustenance and for our nourishment. And so we are so appreciative of all of those people who are committing to be generous with Beth Emet in the future, just like we have relied upon those who gave to us in the past. These are all the people in our Dor L'Dor society. If you don't see your name up there, you can talk to the leadership of Dor L'Dor, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to put your name up there if you put Beth Emet in your will. We would love to have you join us and to continue to sustain our wonderful community into the future. Just this past year, there were 2 bequests that were made to Beth Emet from 2 very important and significant people in our community, and I'd like to acknowledge them at this moment. Richard Lowndy. Many people knew and loved Richard Lowndy. His family, they were founding members of this community, that when you come into the educational building, where the old entrance on the Dempster side, it has Richard's father's name, Mason Lowndy. The Lowndeys were founding members of our congregation, stalwarts, generous with time and finances, and Richard Lowndy was also past president of our congregation. And we miss Richard and are appreciative of the gift that he has given to Beth Emet in his memory. We also received a bequest this year from Helene Rosenberg. Some people mispronounce Helene's name. They see it spelled Helene, and they think it's Helene. Helene would say to me all the time when people would mispronounce her name, "Rabbi, it's Helene like pain." Now, the only thing that Helene was really a pain about, as we know, is that she was, for Brent, she was so committed to adult learning. And she was our adult learning chair for more than a decade. And Helene loved to learn. She came to every class we had at Beth Emet, but she also would learn when, during COVID, it was online. When there were conferences, she would go to them. And Helene would come to the Adult Ed Committee and know scholars all over the world who taught in all different fields, and whether it was Talmud or modern Israeli poetry or Jewish thought or commentary or philosophy or theology. Helene knew a great scholar, and she made sure that that great scholar would teach us here at Beth Emet. And what we have learned from Helene, and all the ways that she was just a pain about making sure that we were as committed to Jewish learning as she was. We miss both Helene and Richard tremendously, and we are so appreciative of their generosity, both while they were alive and now in their passing. May their memories continue to be a blessing as we benefit from all the ways that they have touched our lives and because of their generosity. I'd now like to invite all of those people who are part of our Dor L'Dor Society who have put Beth Emet in their will to rise at this moment so that we can acknowledge you and offer you words of blessing. Midor L'Dor Nagid Godlecha. From generation to generation, we give thanks for God's bounty. Holy One of blessing, we thank you for the Dor L'Dor donors who have ensured that abundance will continue to flow into our lives. Their legacy of generosity will allow our community to blossom for generations to come. As those who came before us nurtured and tended this community, we express our gratitude to these magnanimous members of our beloved community who are dedicated to our congregation's growth and well-being. May your blessings be their constant companion, guiding them towards a life filled with joy and contentment. Amen.